Hi guys, Geekonomics here once again. This is a video for students of GCSE Economics in anticipation of the A593 paper, which is of course tomorrow, Thursday. So I've just been doing a little bit more research with regard to this particular article, and it is of course the article about Nigeria in your pre-release material, so that's figures 8 and 9 in the June 2015 pre-release. And those two articles go into some detail about the problems facing Nigeria in terms of poverty and how that is paradoxical in respect that Nigeria is of course one of the leading oil producers, getting one would think, very rich on oil, and yet the majority of people in the country are getting poorer, and the number of people living in poverty is going up year on year. So just by chance, I've been reading The Economist. This is the May the 30th edition of The Economist, which is this one here. Headline, "The Weaker Sex" on the front of it, all about how boys do a lot worse than girls in their exams and so on. But anyway, if you turn to page 48 of this particular edition, there is an article which helps us to understand why it is that Nigeria is producing millions of barrels of oil per day and yet people are getting poorer all the time. So obviously, it may be a little bit late for you to get a copy of this particular edition of The Economist, so let me just read to you a section of it. So the article is entitled "Problems at the Pump," and it says as follows: "How does a big oil producer end up with no fuel? The irony of that predicament is not lost on citizens of the country with sub-Saharan Africa's largest oil reserves. They endure long hours, long queues at petrol stations, and buy on the black market. Few recall a scarcity as severe as the one that peaked this month. Drivers had to turn to greasy hawkers who demanded up to 6 times the official price for their cans of contraband. Traffic petered out in Lagos, local airlines cancelled flights. Since diesel and petrol are also needed to generate electricity, darkness descended on homes. Shops and offices closed, radio stations went off the air, banks shut early, mobile phone companies warned of network outages. Africa's largest economy ground almost to a halt." So this is last month, ladies and gentlemen. Reading on, it says as follows: "For a country that churns out roughly 2 million barrels of oil a day, this is a scandal. The chief cause is Nigeria's inability to process its crude." Now that of course relates to figure 9 in your pre-release material. "Corruption and mismanagement have left its 4 state refineries to rot, forcing this fuel-guzzling country to import, ladies and gentlemen, up to 80% of its needs." And it goes on to say this, and I want to read you this and then refer to this diagram which I've got on the screen in front of you. "At the heart of the rot is a controversial subsidy scheme under which the government pays wholesalers the difference between the open market cost of fuel and a fixed pump price of 47 naira. No, sorry, 87 naira. 87 naira is equivalent to around about 43 cents, 43 American cents. It is billed as protecting the poor, who see cheap fuel as the sole perk of their country's oil riches. In practice, this subsidy is a mechanism for corruption by complex networks of retailers who embezzle billions of dollars by overstating their imports and pocketing the difference. At its peak in 2011, it was reckoned to cost the government $14 billion annually." Now, we can explain that by way of the diagram on the screen in front of you, which is of course the subsidy diagram. So I'm drawing a diagram here, a subsidy diagram for petrol. You can see that I've drawn the demand curve, relatively inelastic, because of course the demand for oil will be relatively price inelastic. And we've got an initial equilibrium here at P1 and Q1, and the initial equilibrium is at point A. If the government introduces a subsidy, of course, then the price to the general population in Nigeria will fall. So the subsidy shifts S1 to S2. Excuse me, because it lowers the cost of production. So S2 is basically equal to S1 with a subsidy on top of it. And so the costs of production fall, and as you know, when the costs of production fall, your supply curve shifts downwards parallel to the original supply curve of S1. Consequently, the price to individuals in Nigeria falls from P1 to P2, output rises from Q1 to Q2, and we end up at the new equilibrium at point B. And so in this respect, the government in Nigeria are helping everybody in Nigeria, but particularly the less well off, because of course they then think to themselves, oh, isn't this tremendous? We're able to buy this cheap fuel. But of course, the corruption which is taking place in Nigeria is costing, if I refer back to that article again, the corruption in Nigeria is costing the government $14 billion. So let's just consider how that might be the case. So let's say we've said that the cost of a litre of petrol in Nigeria is about $43 cents. And let's say that you can buy it on the open market for about 70 cents or something like that. So if we had a subsidy, a government subsidy, equivalent to, let's say, 30 cents, and of course we're talking US dollars here because of course the oil will be traded internationally in US dollar. Now, if you are a retailer of petrol in Nigeria, you will import, let's say, for example, you import 100 litres. And on each litre, you're receiving a government subsidy of 30 cents in this case. So the cost to the government in that case for the subsidy would of course be 100 litres times the subsidy. So that's going to cost you, or it's going to cost the government $30. However, if you are a corrupt retailer and you're not doing things by the book, and you see everyone else in Nigeria not doing things by the book, rather than tell the local authorities or whoever's responsible for this, rather than tell them you've imported 100 litres, you might say to them, oh well actually I imported 1,000 litres. You may only actually have imported 100, but you tell them you are dishonest and you say I've imported 1,000 litres to a cost of, that's going to cost the government in this case $300. And so you then pocket the difference, and the difference in this case will be $270. Now of course this is very small scale, and the real litres, the real volumes being imported will be much greater than that, and you will be able to cream off, as a corrupt individual, you'll be able to cream off very significant revenues for yourself. And so this, ladies and gentlemen, just helps us to understand figures 8 and 9 and to explain why an oil-rich country, number one, is having to import most of its petrol because they don't have the refineries, or they do have 4 refineries, but the 4 refineries have been left to rot. And it also helps us to understand how the corruption is taking place because there is no close monitoring of how many litres these retailers are importing. People are overstating it and then pocketing the difference. Okay, so we'll leave it at that, ladies and gentlemen, and good luck for the exam for tomorrow.